Stallone, Lundgren, and Van Damme, the founding fathers of the physically powerful, cultivated the image of the hypermale Team America, who used their bulletproof bodies as weapons and weapons as appendages. They would single-handedly save the world, overcome all odds, and embody the perfect masculinity of the new 80s male. Susan Jeffords in Hard Bodies, Hollywood Masculinity in the Reagan Era, relates how the dominance of hyperbolic masculine physiques were a theatrical reflection of the aggressive political rhetoric of the Reagan and Thatcher political era and the values it wished to project. Like the Charles Atlas ads of generations past, America was tired of having sand kicked in its face from its mounting defeats in overseas conflicts like Vietnam, and the films of the 80s were part of the remasculinization rallying cry aimed at clearing away the weak male protagonists, weak politicians, and insecure culture of the 70s. Whereas late 70s presidents saw Jimmy Carter's collapse while involved in the comparatively effeminate activity of jogging, Reagan recognized that muscles were presidential and trained using dumbbells and Nautilus equipment. Reagan's nickname Rombo capitalized on the relatively new association between physical vitality and aggressive professional capability. He aligned himself with the virtues associated with hard bodies, self-mastery, upward mobility, and discipline. No longer was it enough to go for a 3-mile jog or play a friendly game of tennis a few times a week. Exercise in the 80s became labor-intensive, beset with a need for regular PRs. Charles Gaines told Esquire, "When you think of things that Reagan is putting his finger on, the new patriotism, the cheerfulness, the optimism, the voracious work ethic, I can't think of a person better placed than Arnold to capitalize on that." Undoubtedly, Arnold, like a modern Prometheus, had lit a fire in the hearts and minds of the collective consciousness when it came to people building their bodies. In 1960, only 24% of Americans claimed to exercise regularly, but in the space of a generation from 1960 to 1987, the number of people claiming to exercise nearly tripled. By 1987, 69% of Americans said they worked out. Ironically, feminism, which has been attributed for influencing men to start bodybuilding, is also a key element for sparking the fitness boom of the 70s. Empowering women to work out and discover their strength, female participation at gyms increased, and where the women went, the men soon followed. The overt cinematic masculinity of the 80s soon waned in the 90s, and is all but absent in today's cinema. It's interesting to note that even Schwarzenegger's choice of roles softened during a period when a new age cultural shift encouraged men to embrace their emotional and nurturing sides. Arnold went from the conquering Conan and the antagonistic Terminator to a kindergarten cop, a more nurturing and fatherly Terminator, and let's not forget a pregnant male in Junior. Constructing fantasies of male heroism has been replaced with a new breed of aggressive female action star, a level of feminine parity which doubles down on the blurring gender roles, further amplifying the confusion of a man's place in postmodern society. Despite the mostly positive portrayal of masculinity and pumping iron, there's a prevailing undercurrent of undeniable contradiction throughout the film, fetishizing male muscle, which borders on the feminine and at times homoerotic. It's been long debated whether bodybuilding's a sport or little more than a glorified male beauty pageant, in which men are passively exposed to the public's voyeuristic pleasure and/or scrutiny of mostly other men. There's a glaring impotency to the nature of the display of muscle, absent from any kind of physical achievement. Behind all the exertion and dedication to hard labour, there's no longer any function to the form displayed on stage. There's nothing tangible to the effort applied, except for the gnawing inadequacy of a never perfected project, dedicated to an eternally narcissistic and fleeting monument to vanity. Even the ornamental display of hairless, tanned and oiled bodies draws comparisons to the objectified nature of primped, preemed and half-starved catwalk models. This scrutiny extends to self-objectification, in which the mirror becomes a neurotic reflection of the tenuous balance between a continuous, detached self-critique and a visual reminder of unrealized imperfection. If the true yardstick of masculinity is heroic service to a higher calling or commitment of purpose for the greater good, then bodybuilding for the sole purpose of narcissistic self-aggrandizement fails miserably. There's a heroic narrative ascribed to the hyperbole that connotes something industrial or even respectably blue-collar. The process of exercise channels aggression in what becomes the grind. Bodybuilders don't simply work out, they pump iron. The body is viewed as something disassociated from the self, a work in progress to be consciously sculpted and chiseled. Arms become guns or pythons, legs are wheels, lats are wings. The body becomes a third party bodybuilders go to war with. Body parts are blitzed, bombed, shredded, and destroyed. Regular days become back days or push days. But for all the hyperbole, the relatively insular and risk-free nature of the gym pales in comparison to the sporting arena or battlefield, which have always been true platforms for the traditional testing of manhood. On the bodybuilding stage, there's no physical criteria allowing the competitors to prove their skills objectively. No personal bests or goals to be scored. No actual weights lifted. Bodybuilders remain at the mercy of the subjective, financial, and political whims of the monopolizing federation they compete under. The unscrupulous standards of criteria that are highly subjective, paired with externally motivated fragile egos, expose the bodybuilder to an endless Sisyphean task of self-maintenance and reinvention predicated on the validation of others. While Arnold celebrated the fruits of his labours, very rare is the bodybuilder who is truly satisfied with their own resultant end product. Unlike the proverbial artist, a bodybuilder's work is never complete. It's merely revealed in stages of its evolution. Bodybuilders' self-commentary retreats to cliched motifs such as staying hungry, never satisfied, and under construction. Even in the film, with all the camaraderie, there's still a level of cattiness, contrived or otherwise, that's incongruent with the hulking physiques on display. All of these components of bodybuilding are at total odds with the concept of masculinity. In his article Pumping Irony, psychologist Alan Klein stated, "The most striking feature of bodybuilding since the 1970s is men who appear healthy and fit and confident, but are actually unwell, unfit, and insecure." In a society knowing no limits and zero concept of enough is enough, there's little surprise that bodybuilders continue to push the size and appearance of their physiques to new, unhealthy extremes as a surrogate outlet for misplaced masculinity. The original goals of bodybuilding, which complemented and contributed to the balanced virtues of positive masculinity, have today given way to an exclusive focus on body image. It's a glossy world of appearance that relies on visual sleight of hand to convince us that virile looks are synonymous with youth and health, when in reality, health objectives have tended to become secondary to remaking bodies for purely aesthetic ends. This obsession with appearance has been labelled the Adonis complex, reflecting the priority that society places on image over substance and the resulting crisis of male body obsession. Surveys showed men of the 70s were generally content with their bodies. The proliferation of advertising and social media images of extremely muscular male bodies has all but obliterated that sense of satisfaction. where gyms and facilities for different forms of exercise contributed to the social good and empowered individuals to improve their mental and physical well-being, has instead been replaced by a troubled feeling in the minds of many men that they can never measure up to the unrealistic barrage of images they're exposed to, reminding them daily of their inadequacy. This comparison is somewhat reflected in the scene where Arnold guides the young amateur through his poses. The little guy clearly works out, but the difference in physiques clearly illustrates the genetic superiority of the top competitors well beyond the reach of well-intentioned and equally hard-working mere mortals. Arnold is the aspirational model, but you could put 1,000 guys on Arnold's identical diet, training and drug protocol, and next to none of them would replicate even comparative results that Arnold achieved. Throughout the history of many diverse cultures, traditional male behaviours and pursuits received approval and respect. Yet today there's no tests of manhood or concrete signposts on the road to developing a positive degree of masculinity. Bereft of the defined gender roles and identifiable rites of passage, there's an undeniable growing discontent and self-loathing of oneself and the world at large. With the old measures gone, men are seeking new definitions and outlets for establishing their identity, which motivates many to pick up their first dumbbell. As Sam Fussell states in his cautionary tale, Confessions of an Unlikely Bodybuilder, "What if my armour not only kept the world out, but also kept me in? I was more than willing to play the role of a bodybuilder if it allowed me to save myself from myself." There's a lone wolf individualism that attracts many men to bodybuilding, underscored by an overwrought self-reliance and fragile interpersonal relationships with others. Rather than strengthening confidence and self-esteem via the self-improvement offered by bodybuilding, the gym instead becomes an insular refuge from the outside world, where the bodybuilder can solitarily construct a physical carapace that becomes a surrogate emotional shield from the need for relating to the tribe. The industry marketing machine further amplifies men's damaged self-concepts, ensnaring them in a continuous loop of validation-seeking behaviours. The modern-day gym cell has emerged, typifying the emotionally stunted male who dives headlong into bodybuilding to compensate for an inability to socialise or attract women. Trapped in a prison of narcissism and insecurity, the gym cell deifies men like Arnold or other popular influencers as an embodiment of the masculinity they aspire to, not realising that men like Arnold's interpersonal success and positive self-esteem are only a single byproduct of working out and not the sole reason. Bodybuilding attracts loners because of the high degree of individualism in the sport. "The competitive bodybuilder," wrote Pope, "like the individual with anorexia nervosa, engages in social comparisons which may cause him or her to avoid others out of a sense of inadequacy. For those afflicted, piling on muscle mass and obsessively manipulating what goes into their bodies provides a sense of control and autonomy that eludes them in the rest of their lives." Bigorexia or muscle dysmorphia is symptomatic of these trends. An early 2000 study showed that a typical high school boy in the United States would think nothing of taking anywhere between 300 and 1,000 milligrams of steroids per week, and that a competitive weightlifter might take up to several thousand milligrams more. Fueled by an in-your-face excess of fitness influences and easily obtainable drugs, the big are getting even bigger by doing whatever it takes, in a form of chemical one-upmanship for little more than the very unmasculine need for social media validation. Yet bodybuilding ultimately remains a poor proxy for pursuing a sense of masculinity. Due to its obsession with accruing size, to lose size is tantamount to becoming less of a man in every way. And it's not just teens or men. This starts at a young age with the fictional characters and toys marketed to boys. While superheroes have always boasted muscular and well-defined bodies, their physical dimensions have expanded considerably over time, providing a male counterpart to the unrealistic female body image marketed to girls through Barbie and other dolls. Given the proliferation of such imagery in popular culture, most boys today grow up subconsciously measuring themselves against body ideals that are rarely attainable without a level of unhealthy obsession and drugs. Ironically, Arnold, thanks to pumping iron, unknowingly set a new standard of muscularity and definition during his competitive days, ushering in a new breed of bodybuilding freak. Through his films, he normalized the muscular physique, raising the bar for all bodybuilders and many actors that preceded him. A comparison of the pre-steroid era Mr. America winners shows that the average death at 78 years compared to the steroid era winners of 51.5, a differential of 26.5 years. Pandora's box has been opened, and there's no means of reversing these current trends. While the men in pumping iron have mostly gone on to live to ripe old ages, the same cannot be said for their contemporary counterparts. At least 35 well-known bodybuilders died in 2021 alone, which doesn't even begin to account for the no-name regular gym rats who have passed before their time, committed to an endeavour that's as fleeting as it is often paradoxical. Arnold and many of the golden era bodybuilders featured in pumping iron approached bodybuilding in a more health-oriented way compared to today's competitors. While many of the 70s golden era guys are critical of today's mass monsters, there's an irony that in helping to popularize this never-seen-before look, they indirectly set the snowball in motion, leading to the avalanche of insanity that prevails today. Since its inception, bodybuilding has been fundamentally concerned with self-transformation. The metamorphosis through muscle building represents a modern conceptualization of masculinity that emerged at a time of vast social and cultural change. From Sandow to Schwarzenegger, the story is a familiar one that resonates with every influential figure in the history of the Iron Game. The transformation of a weak, sickly boy riddled with self-doubt into a powerful man through disciplined bodybuilding. While the original ideals of the ancient Greeks underpinned the guiding framework for bodybuilding and masculine development, modern bodybuilding has been subverted into something resembling a distorted caricature. The potential effects of this trend on the psyches and body images of young men are troubling, and the question of how the trend might affect future generations is even more disturbing. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts below on the role bodybuilding plays in the modern day crisis of masculinity. If you enjoyed this video series on pumping iron and want to see more deep dives into bodybuilding history from a different perspective, please like and subscribe to the channel below.